Our second lesson is the psychological effects from our screens. So obviously we have spent all of our time up to this point talking about really one of the major psychological effects from our screens. So I'm not going to talk a lot about that in this particular lesson, but I do want to give a disclaimer here on the front end. And that is, I'm really not here to beat up on social media and tell you how bad it is. I'm not saying it's not bad, because it obviously is. But I know my lesson will probably sound like that, but in many ways, social media can be a beneficial tool. It really can. My brother-in-law lives in Australia, and I'll be honest with you, I wouldn't even know what my nieces looked like if it wasn't for Facebook. I really wouldn't. I think about grandparents who may live in another city or another state away from their children. Well, social media actually gives them an opportunity to feel like they're a part of their lives and see pictures and see things that they're involved in. And I think about long-lost college buddies. I got a few college buddies that if it wasn't for Facebook, I'm not sure how much I'd keep in touch with them. So there are some positive things. And here's the thing, it can also be fun. As I said a minute ago, I'm a diehard music fan, a big baseball fan. And I do a lot. I follow a lot of people on Twitter that allows me to follow music and allows me to follow baseball. And that's pretty much all I do. I don't follow people I know. I just follow like baseball news and music news, and that's it. But here's the thing. I really believe social media itself is not the problem. The problem is how we as a society use it. That's what the problem is. And the thing is, it's become such an important and integral part of people's everyday life that instead of connecting with people, ironically, they're connecting with this device that keeps them from doing that. And that's a big part of what this lesson is about. I want to talk about some of those effects and what it's doing to us if we don't use it properly. So I want you to be honest with yourself. You don't have to answer out loud, obviously. But I want you to be honest with yourself. If I ask you not to access the internet for a day, just one day, how difficult would it be? Now, here's the thing. A lot of people would say, oh, it's not that hard. Well, there have been some studies done that seem to show that it's a lot harder than people think it is. And I'll give you one specific example of that. Cornell Information Science did a research study a few years ago that showed just how difficult it was to keep people from looking at Facebook. The study included only people that said they wanted to stop using Facebook. So those are the people that they pulled in for the study, people who said they did not want to use Facebook anymore. And so for the study, I don't know why they picked this, but they picked 99 days, so just over 3 months, that they were going to have these people not look at Facebook. And what they found was truly amazing. The vast majority, all but a few, couldn't even last but a couple of days. Isn't that something? They couldn't even last a couple of days. And I want you to remember, those are people who said they didn't want to look at Facebook anymore. Now, in psychology, you call a behavior that you can't stop, that you want to stop, a what? An addiction. That's what it is. So social networks are set up to be intentionally addictive. Most people check and interact on social media sites on a very regular basis all throughout the day, and they really have no idea how much time they spend on it. The average adult spends 2.5 hours a day on social media. And the average child spends, average teenager, 9 hours a day online, with a huge portion of that on social media. Now, when you look at that, it's pretty interesting to think when we look at how the major social network companies are working hard every single day to have exactly that happen. They don't want you to realize how much time you're spending on there. They don't want you to realize that it is addictive. But at the end of the day, that is their goal. And one of the addictive elements of that is associated with FOMO, which many of you have probably heard, and that is the idea of the fear of missing out. Everyone is on Facebook because everyone is on Facebook, right? And by not checking constantly, we are afraid that we are missing something important. Of course, the great irony is we are missing out on something important, and that is living our everyday life. But you've probably heard of the idea of the network effect, right? The idea that the more people that are involved in a network, the more important that network becomes. Everyone has a smartphone, so you need a smartphone. Everyone has Facebook, so you need Facebook. Everyone is on Twitter, so you need to be on Twitter or Instagram or TikTok or choose your poison. Right? The more people have it, the more people feel like they need it. And everybody is there because everybody is there. I think about my mother-in-law who can, barely turn on a computer, but she's on Facebook because everybody is on Facebook. Now, Facebook itself has over 1 billion users, approximately 1/6 of the world's population, and something like 75% of all people in the Western world have a Facebook account. Now, we'll talk a little more about some of that in a moment, but here's number 2, and that is you are a lab rat and a giant scientific experiment. I don't know if you know this, but there are numerous tricks that social media companies use in order to get you to continually check your accounts. One trick that they use is that little notification number, that little red number at the bottom. That number shows you how many people have mentioned you or follow you. And it basically works like a clickbait headline. It's saying to you, hey, look at how many people are talking about you, right? And you have to look at it. You have to. And again, that is part of what they want you to do. And the biggest tool they have in their toolbox is algorithmic filtering. Now, sites like Facebook and Twitter, they tweak their algorithms and then monitor the response of the user to see if those tweaks get the user to stay on longer or engage more with the platform. So basically, that's what we are. We're lab rats in their experiment. And the tweaking of those filters for addiction means that in theory, these sites get more addictive to you each and every day. And that the sites are in a war for survival where only the one that can get you to stay on it the longest wins. So they're doing everything they can to keep you involved as much as they possibly can. And a part of this process is making sure that you see the content that fits you. You know, one of the weirdest things was, you guys have had this experience. My wife and I, as I told you, we were out west and we flew into Las Vegas. And when we were in Vegas, I can't tell you how many ads I had for shows pop up on my Facebook feed for shows in Vegas. I told you I'm a big concert fan, so I follow, or music fan, so I follow all that stuff, and it was constantly on there. That scares me to death that they know exactly where I am, exactly what I'm doing, and exactly what fits me at that moment. We've all had that experience. You've had that experience where you were talking about some sort of home repair, and the next thing you know, the exact thing you're talking about pops up on your feed, right? Am I wrong? You've had it happen, because we all have. And so that is a scary thing. Here's another part of that. A part of this content that fits you is your personality, your beliefs. We all as people inherently want to see, hear, and interact with things that we agree with. So what they do is they figure out your demographic profile and they hammer away at that demographic profile. And there's a lot of things, we could talk about this for days, but one thing that's really interesting, you ever wonder how we have become so polarized as a society? Well, it's pretty simple. We become so polarized as a society because the news we get literally fits what we already believe, right? So no matter where you fit in the spectrum of things, you will see news on all of those sites that fit what you already believe. So it reaffirms everything that you already want to hear and already want to know. And that's all part of what they are doing. Now, I am not a brain expert. Don't pretend to be. That's not my area of expertise. But a key component to this is the idea of dopamine, which is one of the chemicals that actually is a part of what we were talking about in the pornography lesson. You've probably heard about it, but what dopamine is a chemical that is released into the brain. It's a natural chemical, so there's nothing wrong with it, but it's often called the pleasure chemical. And we get releases of it usually when we are doing things that we enjoy. Exercise, food, sex, drugs, and sometimes even our hobbies can actually create a dopamine release into the brain. The problem is we can flood our system with it. And when we flood our system with it, then the brain recognizes that it's getting too much, and then it naturally will start to produce less of it. And when it produces less of it, we do things that actually increase the production to get an artificial spike in order to keep it to be at its natural level. So in essence, when we start to rely on things like Facebook or social media, that's actually what's happening. It's giving us a dopamine release. And if you're thinking, what the world's he talking about? I don't even know. It sounds like he's talking Greek up there. Let me give you a really good idea. Have you ever heard of Sean Parker? Sean Parker is one of the founders of Facebook. And he actually said this, quote, "How do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible? To achieve this goal, to achieve this goal, we have exploited a vulnerability in human psychology. Whenever someone likes or comments on a post or a photograph, we give you a little dopamine hit." End quote. You think they know what they're doing? They understand that concept, that if they can make you feel good by checking in, they can get you in. Now, in a 2017 article titled "How Evil is Tech?", a New York Times columnist, David Brooks, said this, and I'm going to quote it for you. He said, "Tech companies understand what causes dopamine surges in the brain, and they lace their products with hijacking techniques that lure us in and create compulsion loops. Most social media sites create irregularly timed rewards, a technique long employed by the makers of slot machines based on the work of American psychologist B.F. Skinner, who found that the strongest way to reinforce a learned behavior in rats, told you were a rat in an experiment, learned behavior in rats is to reward it on a random schedule. So when a gambler feels favored by luck, dopamine is released." A professor at New York University and author of a book entitled "Addiction by Design," she said, "This is the secret to Facebook's era-defining success, that we compulsively check the site because we never know when the delicious ting of social affirmation may sound." In other words, they have engineered this to psychologically addict us and to pull us in. Isn't that incredible? They know exactly what they're doing. And they're doing it intentionally to keep us coming back for more. And we come back for more and we love it while we're doing it. Isn't that incredible? So we are lab rats in a giant social experiment. Number 3, this to me is one of the biggest ones. It increases selfishness and narcissism. You know, over the last couple of years, a plethora of research has been pouring in that makes the connections between Facebook and narcissism. Studies are consistently finding that people who score higher on the narcissistic personality inventory tend to have more friends on Facebook. They tend to tag themselves more often in photos, and they tend to update their statuses more frequently. According to Laura Buffatti, a postdoctoral researcher in Spain, she said, quote, "Narcissists use Facebook and other social networking sites because they believe others are interested in what they are doing, and they want others to know what they are doing." So in general, social media websites encourage us to self-promote, and as users, we are the ones who generate all of the content. So people often utilize it, and you know this, to look important, to look special, to gain status, to gain self-esteem. And the trouble with this aspect of social networking is that nearly everyone paints an unrealistic picture of themselves. And I think that's what's really important. People will select the most attractive photos of themselves. You know, I know people and I see the Facebook pictures they post and I'm like, is that them? Right? We've all seen that. Because what are they doing? They're picking the things that look the absolute best. Not only that, they tend to populate their news feeds with the most attractive bits of information about themselves. Now look, it's not weird and it's not new that we like to talk about ourselves. Historically, humans have devoted around 30 to 40% of all of their speech talking about themselves. All right, so that's not new. We love to do that, and I actually think that's pretty normal. But here's the thing. You want to know what the number is online? It jumps to 80%. Online, 80% of the talk is about themselves, over twice as much as we normally do. And here's the thing. Talking face-to-face is messy. It's emotionally involved. And we don't have the time to think about what to say and respond sometimes quickly. You know how some people are not very witty and not very good at responding immediately? It's pretty normal. We have to read facial cues, we have to read body language, but here's the thing, online we can spend all kinds of time crafting exactly what we want to say. And here's the thing. That self-presentation, that positioning ourselves to be seen the way we want to be seen, I like to call that image management. And that's in essence what narcissism is. It's managing your image in front of others. That's what celebrities do all the time, right? They manage their image in front of everybody else. So the feeling that we get from self-presentation is so strong that viewing a Facebook profile, your own, has been actually shown to increase self-esteem. 62% of people say they feel better about themselves when people react positively to what they post on social media. Now again, that in and of itself is not bad, but what is the problem there? It's the reliance on that. And that's where the problem exists. Now, the fourth one is depression. This unrealistically sunny picture that so many social networkers paint of themselves also can have a negative psychological effect, interestingly enough, on their followers. Now that's a thought that a lot of people don't think about, but recent studies of undergraduates across the country have shown that, quote, students who were more involved with Facebook were more likely to think that other people's lives were happier and better than their own. How about that? Other people's lives were better and happier than their own. And these heavy Facebook users were also more likely to negatively compare themselves to others and feel worse about themselves, all because they saw a few pictures on Facebook where people's lives looked more fun, successful, or exciting than theirs. So ironically enough, the more somebody uses Facebook and sees everybody else on there and how great everybody else's life is, they start to feel depressed and down because their life is not that great. But here's the thing. The other person's life is not that great either. They're just posting all the great things, and that's it. Now, the University of Pennsylvania conducted a study in 2018 where they actually took 143 undergraduate students. Approximately half of those students used their social media regularly, but the other half were restricted to using it only 30 minutes a day. And what they found was pretty astonishing. The group that limited their usage to only 30 minutes a day displayed less depressive symptoms in 3 weeks. Their depressive symptoms almost disappeared in 3 weeks' time. They reported themselves as being happier. And one of the students said this, not comparing my lives to the lives of others has made a much stronger impact than I ever expected. And I feel a lot more positive about myself during these 3 weeks. Wow. 3 weeks. And the depressive symptoms almost disappeared. There have been numerous studies done that have reported these exact same findings. The more that you use Facebook, the more likely you are to experience depressive symptoms. Isn't that incredible? Absolutely incredible. This is one of my favorite ones, and I say this all the time, but one of the problems with social media is everyone has a voice, even when they shouldn't. And I think this is very important. This one not only plays into narcissism, but obviously Facebook and Twitter and TikTok and Instagram and all those things give everyone a voice. What I mean by that, you probably know. Literally everyone can spew their opinion about literally everything, and they do, and here's what happens is people actually dignify those ignorant, stupid responses with other posts, right? We know that happens. We see it all the time. And here's the problem. Even if someone responds negatively to a post that someone makes, what are they actually doing? They are still lending some sort of validity to their thought by doing that. Does that make sense? And so it's like the kid who acts up and does bad things to get attention. I mean, that's in essence what's happening here. So they're still getting attention even if people respond negatively about their thoughts or beliefs on there. And it makes them believe, here's what's really important, it makes them believe that people really care about what they have to say. It makes them believe that people are really focused on them and their opinions. And it gives an extreme sense of self-importance and makes us think more of ourselves than we should. And that's not healthy. And because these sites filter things our way, it gives the impression that everyone else thinks like we do, which is not true. And that's also another part of it. So this is where I think we need that reality check. Our opinions don't matter. They really don't. And they are one of potentially billions of opinions. So they don't matter. And a person sitting in their parents' basement who is unemployed with little to no life experience does not have the same insight on an issue as someone who may have a doctorate degree with years of experience in a particular field. But here's the problem. Social media actually puts those opinions on the same level. And that's the problem. Someone who is an expert in their field and has spent years researching and studying something can post an article or a post, and a teenager can give a rebuttal and get an attention for that. Is that not incredible? But we see that happen all the time. In the real world, outside of the cyber world, that teenager's opinion does not matter because they don't even have the experience or the education or the things they might need to have an opinion about a particular thing. But in the social media world, their opinion actually feels equal. And here's the thing. When people respond to that, especially if they respond positively, it validates that behavior over and over again. In other words, uneducated stupidity can run rampant. And let me ask you a question. Do you think we have uneducated stupidity running rampant in our world today? And the answer to that is a clear yes. And this is one of the major reasons for that, is because people can give their opinions on anything, even if they shouldn't be able to give an opinion on something. And that's a very important part of the psychological effect of our screens. The sixth one is it can lead to anonymity, to a fake life. One of the buzzwords for millennials and Generation Z is the word authentic. One of the many reasons that young people have left Christianity over the last 20 years is they view corporate worship, as they like to call it, as inauthentic. And many young people very much want a relationship with Jesus or a higher power, but they don't want to come to a church building to participate in worship. They want and are striving for something real and authentic, but ironically, they can never seem to find it. And that's a really important part of this. And I think part of that, again, has to do with social media. See, for some people, the cyber world presents a different reality. And because of its anonymity, they become a different person online. Some people are more sarcastic when they get online. Some people are more mean when they get online. And some people say things that they would never say to somebody's face because if they did, they'd probably get knocked out, right? But they do it all the time online, and that's why we get this idea of cyberbullying. You can say things that you might not ever say to someone's face because it doesn't feel as real when you're typing it on a computer or a phone. And others, of course, as we've talked about, present a false image to make themselves appear in a way that isn't reality. And here's the thing about Christians. We as Christians, we're supposed to act like Christians everywhere, including online, crazily enough. And just because we're sitting behind a computer or sitting behind a phone screen, and it's just us and that screen, it doesn't mean we stop being a Christian. And studies show that many people use the cyber world as a false reality. They admit to becoming something they're not. And I don't know if you've heard the Brad Paisley song online. If you're a country music fan, you probably have. But I'll read you some of the lyrics because I just love this song, and it's a perfect example of this. He says, because I'm online, I'm out in Hollywood. I'm 6'5" and I look good. I drive a Maserati and I'm a black belt in karate and I love a good glass of wine. Online, I live in Malibu. I pose for Calvin Klein and I've been in GQ. I'm single and I'm rich and I got a set of six-pack abs that'll blow your mind. When you got my kind of stats, it's hard to get a date, let alone a real girlfriend. But I grow another foot and I lose a bunch of weight every time I log in. Online, I'm out in Hollywood, I'm 6'5" and I look good. Even on a slow day, I can have a three-way chat with two women at one time. I'm so much cooler online. And that song was a #1 smash, and we kind of laugh, chuckle at those lyrics because we know it's true. And here's what's crazy. That song was written in 2007. How much worse is it today? That's something. If you are living a false life online, the question is why? You see, if we do, it says something about us deep inside. And I say this often in my classes, and sometimes people are taken aback when I say this, but what you believe doesn't matter. What you believe doesn't matter. But what you say you believe doesn't matter. What you actually believe is what does. What you actually believe is how you will act. We say a lot of things that we believe. We say a lot, but saying it isn't nearly as important as actually believing it. And here's why. Because we will live out what we believe to be true. We'll actually live that out. But if we just say it, we might not be living it out. And I think it's very, very important. You see, people say it's not okay to lie, that it's not okay to pretend that you're something that you're not. Yet millions do it every single day. Because really, I don't think they believe that deep down inside. Is there any wonder, by the way, that millennials and Generation Z are searching for authenticity? I don't think it's a surprise at all that that's the thing that they're searching for. Because the irony is they're so consumed with life through filters. They're so consumed with false images of themselves and other people. They're so consumed with seeing false images of family and friends that in some cases I'm not sure they even know how to be authentic. I'm not even sure they know how to recognize it if it hit them in the face. Because everything in life is through filters. Their life's been so consumed with fakeness. And that is part of the problem. They want authenticity, but they don't know where to go to find it. And that is a big part of the problem of what our screens and what social media has done to us. Here's another one. No patience as a society, delayed gratification. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the marshmallow test. Marshmallow test was a really cool thing they did many years ago. And basically what they did is they took children from the ages of 4 to 6 and they placed them in a room with treats on the table. And they basically told the kids this: you can have a treat now, if you'd like. But if you wait 15 minutes, you can have 2 treats. And they would track how these children responded to that. You know what's fascinating about that? When those same kids were studied later in life, the children who waited 15 minutes to get the second treat actually displayed higher SAT scores and had better emotional regulation than those who didn't. Studied at 4 to 6 years old, the ones who waited had higher SAT scores, better emotional regulation, and they were able to delay gratification into their 40s. Now, I'm going to say if they were able to do that into their 40s, I'm pretty sure they were able to do that the rest of their lives. So the point is, as early as 4 to 6 years old, they could determine whether or not someone could delay gratification and how it would affect them. Isn't it kind of interesting that patience is one of the fruits of the Spirit? Patience is a foreign concept in 2021. The fact that we can find information as quick as we can type it can have really negative effects on our patience. And as Christians, we are called to be patient. And that's part of our growth. I want you to think about this. If you want something right now, you can go to Amazon and you can, if you're willing to pay the shipping on it, you can have it on your doorstep tomorrow. You don't even have to get out of your pajamas, right? If you have a favorite TV series, you don't have to wait till next week to watch the next episode. You can binge the whole thing as quick as you can watch it, right? I will even argue with you that in this day and age, young people don't even have to learn the awkwardness of going up to somebody and asking them out on a date because they have an app in which they can go to and just swipe right, right? So there are a lot of things about delayed gratification that people who are growing up in the cyber world haven't had to deal or don't have to deal with. But here's the thing. Things like job satisfaction, things like the strength of your relationship or your marriage, things like joy, love of life, self-confidence, learning a skill set, learning contentment. Guess what those things take? They take time. They take a lot of time. And they're hard, and they're messy, and they're difficult. And see, there's no app for those things. And the overall journey in life is long and difficult. And if you don't know how to deal with those things, you're going to struggle in life. And I actually think that's part of the problem. You have young people who are disappointed that they can't make $100,000 the second they walk out of college. Well, that's not realistic. That's not a realistic thing because life doesn't work that way. Very few people become fortunate like that. But these young people are so unhappy because they've never had to wait and learn these skills. Studies are saying now that young people struggle with this more than any generation prior. And I think that is because they are so used to things happening immediately. They aren't used to waiting. Now, I'm going to tell you something. If you are a parent out there or a grandparent out there who has grandchildren, if you want to do your kids a great service, you know what you should teach them? Teach them the concept of delayed gratification. Teach them to wait and to be patient about things. Don't allow them to have whatever they want immediately. Make them save up their money to buy it. Make them wait months until Christmas to get that thing they really want. Give them the gift of patience and the understanding that the best things in life really do come to those that know how to wait and to be patient. And then here's the last one. A lack of real communication, skills, and connection. You know, one thing that's really interesting, did you know that people talk less today than they used to? And here's what I mean by that. If you go somewhere where you would, in the past, have interacted with someone, now people don't do that anymore. They play on their phone. So, for instance, if you go to the doctor's office, or you go to an airport, or you go to a social event like a baseball game or a concert, if there's a stranger sitting beside you, you see in the past what a person would do is they would actually have a conversation with that stranger and get to know that person. Now, granted, they may not know them past that 5, 10, 15 minutes, however long it was, but they would actually have a conversation with that individual. So places like that are places that historically people have practiced communication skills, because situations like that don't really matter in the long run. You know, if you make a fool out of yourself or it's awkward or whatever, I mean, it's 15 minutes or whatever, right? It's not something long term, but those are places that we would practice skills. Did you know that young people who have grown up with social media don't experience that? Studies show that what they do is they play on their phone in those situations, that they don't actually have those conversations with strangers. And what does that do? Well, that actually hinders their communication skills. Many companies now look for someone that can simply talk and someone that can actually communicate, because so many young people don't have those skills now. And what's fascinating about that, there is a I don't, you know, it's ironic, I saw this on Facebook. There is a term out there going around called the Oregon Trail generation. The Oregon Trail generation is a generation that I actually fall into. I'm kind of towards the back end of it, but it's people kind of around 40 to like 47, 48. I may have my numbers wrong, but it's people who are in their early to mid 40s, right? And I actually think it may go down to late 30s. But there's a small window in there. It's less than a generation. It's a piece of a generation. It's called the Oregon Trail generation. And what it means is this. If you are familiar with Oregon Trail was a video game that you played on the computers. And it was the first one that was ever introduced in schools. And you would try to get your family through the Oregon Trail, and usually you died of dysentery on the way, right? You normally never won the game, right? So, but what was important about that is that generation, that sliver of time, is an interesting generation. And I think about my experiences, and it fits. Because I actually remember my mom telling me to get out of the house and go play and go do something, and she would yell at me when it was time for dinner. And me and my friend Stephen would go in the woods across the street, and we would ride four-wheelers all day, right? I literally remember my great-grandfather who did not have running water in his house, and if I went to visit him and had to go to the bathroom, I had to go to the outhouse. I actually remember that experience, right? I remember life without social media, without the internet. I remember going in the backyard and having to turn the antenna so I could get one of the 4 channels that we had, 3, 5, 7, and 11 at my house, and that was it. That's all you had. And so I remember those things. Not that old. I'm 43. I don't think I'm that old. I'm sure young people would think I'm old. But I remember that stuff. But I also was young enough, or old enough, that I remember things like, obviously, internet coming into schools and us going to do research on the computer. right? Does that make sense? So that generation had that interesting time frame of having both. And what's important about that is all the people behind my age group have never had the experience of life without the internet. They've never had the experience of life without social media because it is all that they have known. And that's where an interesting dividing line takes place of what is happening in society. Now, here's a few other things about that lack of connection and communication skills. Another one is lack of confidence. With less face-to-face communication, it leads to a lack of confidence when we have to do it. And this is particularly important for young people because those who are older have gotten practice at that. We've learned how to communicate where many people have never had some of those opportunities and they are less confident about it. And here's another one, lack of critical thinking skills. Did you know having face-to-face conversations with people who aren't exactly like you causes you to create critical thinking skills? When we are naturally forced to talk to someone different than us, when we maybe have to defend a point of view or have a nice friendly debate with someone face-to-face, we have to stretch those critical thinking skills. I remember when I was in high school, we would debate all kinds of stupid things, and me and my friends still debate all these stupid things, like who's the greatest rock band of all time or who the best baseball player is. We argue and debate about that stuff all the time. And it may seem silly, but here's what that's doing. It's important because it's requiring you to think critically. It's requiring you to defend a point of view and to hear other points of view. And silly conversations like that are valuable. But those conversations don't happen quite as often today. And part of that is because young people are being taught to regurgitate what they are learning, not critically think. And that's something that's happening all over the place. Another part of that is social cues. With social cues, we only talk to people through social. If we only talk to people through social media and text, we miss the most important part of communication. The single most important part of communication is not the words that come out of our mouth. It's actually the social cues. Experts will tell you that 80 to 90% of communication is body language, tone of voice, not the actual words. And that's really important because via social media and text, those things just aren't there. And if they aren't there, what does that mean? Well, it means that people are becoming worse at reading those things. So, how you use social media will impact you. For instance, if you talk with people who are constantly negative and don't edify others, you'll become like that too. And social media is a perfect way to tear down and slander others, and we're all very aware that that happens all the time. And I think it's interesting because we need to remember technology was made to serve us, not for us to serve it, which is basically what has now happened. It's completely flipped. C.S. Lewis, who is one of my favorite authors, he says, if we consider the unblushing promises of reward and the staggering nature of the rewards promised in the Gospels, it would seem that our Lord finds our desires not too strong, but too weak. We are half-hearted creatures, fooling about with sex and drink and ambition when infinite joy is offered to us. We are far too easily pleased. Now, obviously, that quote was way before social media was invented, but I actually think C.S. Lewis's words ring more true today than they did even back then. We are half-hearted creatures, aren't we? Fooling around with sex and drink and ambition while infinite joy is offered to us. And I don't think we need to be so easily pleased with the things of this world. We shouldn't let these things addict us and enslave us, and we numb ourselves with all kinds of meaningless things that keep us from experiencing the joy that God designed us to enjoy. Now, as I said to you earlier, my point of this lesson was not to beat up on social media, not to say that social media is sinful per se, but I do think the temptation for it to be sinful is clearly there. Some of those things are easily seen in what we've talked about, but I'll give you a few more examples. When someone meets an old college roommate or old high school girlfriend on Facebook, and after a year-long online relationship, they leave their wife and kids, I think that qualifies sinful. If I use social media and I allow that to hinder my relationship with my family or neglect real responsibilities, I think that would qualify as sinful. If I become a self-absorbed narcissistic jerk that wants to show everyone how awesome I am and how fun my life is, that might just be sinful. And I also think it is important for us to point out one last thing, and that is this. Words like friend and community have been reduced to someone that we have no connection with other than they have accepted a friend request. And I think that is very important. Real friends aren't Facebook friends. Real friends are people that we have real connections and real interactions with. People who are actually a part of our lives, not someone that we might talk to through a computer screen. Studies are showing us, as I said, that people don't know how to have conversations. They don't know how to resolve conflict, and they aren't creating meaningful relationships, and I think that's one of the reasons. Online friends aren't friends, and I think it's fascinating, but there have been a lot of studies done about this idea of friendship and capacity to have it. Most studies say that we only have the capacity to deal with about 150 people at a time in our life. I think that's really interesting. The capacity to have about 150 people in our lives at any one time. And when you get right down to that, there's a circle and it starts to close in. And when you get down to the middle of the circle, there's only room for about 5 close, intimate friends in your life. Isn't that fascinating? So of the capacity to have about 150 people involved in our lives, only about 5 close, intimate friends. So my question is, why do we care how many Facebook friends we have? There are a lot of people who really, truly care about that. And here's the thing. The cyber world's a dangerous place, and we need to remind ourselves of that. And I love the idea of the big picture. And it's something I try to remind myself of over and over again. Where does this fit into the big picture? When I look at the apostles, when I look at Christ, when I look at Christians that I personally admire, they all seem to have one thing in common. And that is they see the big picture. They understand the things that are important. They understand what matters. They understand what doesn't matter, and they know how to keep life in perspective. I have seen it because of what I do for a living. I have had young people in my life, in my office, who are experiencing real anxiety over Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. They had a post that didn't get enough likes. They had someone who didn't respond to them in the way that they thought they should have responded. And it's amazing to me when something so insignificant can create so much stress in people's life. And my question is that person really seeing the big picture? Now, I want to end with this, and I'll ask you a quick question. I obviously don't want you to answer out loud. I just want you to think about it. What's your purpose for using social media? Do you do it to stay connected with family and friends? Do you do it to brag about how awesome your life is and how incredibly smart you are? Do you do it to spew your opinions? Do you do it to get as many likes and as many friends on there as you can? Do you do it to follow an interest or a hobby? I think it's really important to ask yourself about why you use it, and are you using it in a way that glorifies God? We'll close with this. Tonight's lesson obviously was not designed to offer an invitation. That's not the point of the lesson, obviously. It's to talk about these serious things in our life. But whenever we get together as a church, I think it is always important to make sure that we do just that.